My name is Jonathan Wolff. I'm the Alfred Landecker Professor of Values and Public Policy at the Blavatnik School of Government in the University of Oxford. Welcome to my exp. One of the main themes in my work over the years has been thinking about equality and inequality, and thinking about this from the point of view of distributive justice. Coming from broadly well-meaning, middle-class, left-wing family, I'd always thought that great inequality was unjust, particularly inequality of wealth. And when I got to university as an undergraduate, I was very pleased that this was one of the topics I was going to be studying. So at that time, it was only a few years after John Rawls had published his famous theory of justice. And Rawls argued that a just society is one where the worst off are made as well off as possible. So what we should do to judge the justice of our society is to look at the wealth and income of the worst off and to see if that could be increased without others becoming poorer than those worst off people were before. So in other words, we judge the justice of a society by how it treats those who are worst off. This is a very appealing view, but it does allow inequalities. So it says that if we need inequality to make the worst off better off, we should accept that. And some people on the left were arguing that that was not right and that we should aim for greater equality, even if it means that everyone suffers. So this was a debate that continues. Should we allow incentives for the rich and they would bring the poor with them? A rising tide raises all boats. Or should we say, no, what's important is income equality, even if that makes everyone a little bit worse off than they might have been otherwise? If people are lonely, that can be a big problem in their lives. It can make them extremely unhappy. It could make them diminish other experience in their life. And so there's a question about whether, from a point of view of equality, we should worry about loneliness. And some people have argued that loneliness is not really something that we can think about from the point of view of distributive justice. And they've said that if it was, we would have to identify people who are lonely. That could be a problem to begin with. And compensate them for their loneliness. That would mean giving them extra money. And what we would then have to do is perhaps tax people with plenty of friends and give some of that money to people who are lonely in order to compensate them for their loneliness, to remedy it. And that would bring about a just society. But this looks like an absurd policy. Who really is going to promote the policy of taxing people who are not lonely and giving some of that money to people who are lonely? And I would certainly agree that that is an absurd policy. There are many problems with it. We'd have to identify and stigmatize people who are lonely. How do we know people really are lonely? Perhaps those with friends would pretend to be lonely in order to get the benefit and so on. And so from the point of view of distributive justice, where justice is about distributing things to make up for disadvantage, it looks like we have to leave loneliness out of the theory of justice. People who are lonely should receive our attention from the point of view of trying to create a society of equals. That then raises the question, well, what do we do about it? And in fact, we already know what to do. We're not very good at doing it, but we already know what we should be doing. So one thing is we should think about town planning. We should build our communities so that people can meet each other, that people can get public transport, people can get around and see each other. We should arrange things like subsidized evening classes so that people who are lonely can go out in the evening and have social contact, maybe even make new friends. So there are things we can do to alleviate loneliness. And what's so interesting about this is that no one has to identify as lonely in order to benefit from them. One of the problems with the type of compensation scheme is that you have to first of all find out who is lonely in your society, and as I said, that leads to stigmatization and gaming the system. But if we just have subsidized evening classes, if we have well-designed public transport systems, if we have well-designed town centres, then everyone will benefit, lonely or not so lonely, and we don't have to classify society into two groups, the lonely and the non-lonely. There's a question about the difference between an equal society and a fair society. Some people are going to deny that there's a difference and just say equality and fairness are the same. And of course, everything depends on how you define those terms, and on some definitions of equality and some definitions of fairness, equality and fairness are just the same. I think if we're trying to make a distinction here, what we would want to do is make a distinction between equal treatment and fair treatment, and understanding equal treatment as the same for everyone. Many years ago, Karl Marx wrote about this in the Critique of the Gotha program. He pointed out that some socialists were trying to build a program on the idea of an equal share, or a right to an equal share. And Marx said, well, no, that is a ridiculous idea because some people have bigger needs than others, some people have dependents. If we give everyone an equal share, some people are going to be able to meet their needs, other people are going to go hungry. And so a fair allocation would take into account not just dividing things up equally, but people's need, maybe their desert, maybe their contribution, depending on your theory of fairness. So I would say there's a difference between fairness and equal treatment, but I would say fairness and treating people as equals are much closer as notions.